Hello, Tamra Stanley here. I am sharing with you my week 2 discussion. Action research was the topic, and I'm looking at the advantages and barriers that may be involved in the particular action research topic that I have chosen. This is for EL541 research methodologies in the Master of Leadership in Global Christian Education program at Prairie College. So first we look at my question. The research question is, does standards-based grading improve students' understanding of their learning and the purpose of learning? So to give you a little bit of information, my school at the elementary level implemented standard-based grading several years ago, I think 4 years ago before I came there, and it has been relatively successful, but we have not implemented it from 6th through 12th grade. The head of education, the director of education, is her title, wants to implement standards-based grading in the secondary level, and so that's something that we're looking toward. For my own personal research, I would like to see, will standards-based grading improve our students' perception of learning? Because at this time they're very focused on what is their grade, getting the percentage. Everyone wants to have as close to 100% as possible, and students don't necessarily understand what the grade actually represents. You know, it's the general idea that, well, I did all of the work, so I should have a 100. Whereas, you know, a grade is supposed to represent how much you understand of the information. And also we have teachers who include things like late penalties, or students might have a low grade because they didn't finish assignments, etc. So the grade is not strictly based on what they understand. So what I'm looking at is, if we change to a standards-based grading system where the students know the standards and they're working towards mastering all of these standards, and they can see, yes, I can do standard X, but I'm not very good at standard Y, whatever the case may be, then they would understand what their grade represents, and that would be true for families and teachers. But my primary focus is, can we improve it? We also have ESLers, which we call, that's the abbreviated term for expected school-wide learning results. And a couple of our ESLers relate to this question. Number one, developing a rational and critical thinker who applies understanding and knowledge to new problems. And number two, more directly related, developing skills to be a lifelong learner. One of the specific lifelong learning skills that is identified in common terminology is accepting responsibility for your own learning. And so I do wonder, maybe my research question should change to, does standards-based grading improve students' ability to take responsibility for their own learning? Perhaps that's more specific. I'm not sure. Obviously we're early in the process, but fortunately I was still able to identify some advantages to answering the question. Even if I narrow it down more specifically, I believe these advantages will still apply. Number one would be teacher buy-in. The teacher attitude will directly impact that of students and parents. So it's important because student buy-in will be more difficult to achieve if the teachers aren't on board. Our teachers and students have very good relationships, very open, and so if the teachers haven't bought in, students will find those teachers who do not believe in standards-based grading, and they will kind of encourage or join in the opposition. So according to Karagiorgi et al., the benefits of engaging in action research at a school level can have many positive impacts on the teachers. And here's a specific quote: "Getting involved in this process changed our view of instruction from a process by which the students learn to a process by which we, the school staff, can learn and develop as well. The project helped us develop a culture of cooperation, exchanging ideas and good practices, and we engaged in reflective thinking." So this is a positive situation where the teachers were able to see what was happening. And we have another quote: "When educators engage in action research, they develop agency and gain control of knowledge and address questions for themselves, instead of being subservient to the knowledge enacted on their educational context." In our case, standards-based grading is being implemented from the top down. It would be easy for teachers to feel powerless or resentful, have a negative attitude, as if the leaders of the school are just bringing in another thing that they have to do. So the positive situation is that, according to Clark et al., engaging in action research can mitigate this result and help the teacher's attitude towards this implementation. So hopefully, because of the positive results that other schools have seen in action research, we can experience that same situation where our teachers, through the action research, will buy into what we are doing and why we're implementing standards-based grading. Number 2, the second advantage is evidence-based outcome. If we're going to implement standards-based grading, it would be nice to have specific data to support or oppose continuing the implementation of standards-based grading. Just because it works in other contexts and other schools doesn't mean it will work for us. So, action research would give us data that can be used in order to determine whether we move forward with standards-based grading. Rather than implementing standards-based grading without reflection, we can use the results of the action research to adjust or reconsider moving forward. It is possible that standards-based grading is not the answer to the stated problem in our context. A quote here from Clark et al. Says, data is most valuable to an educational context when it is deeply relatable and relevant to the specific educational context. Data specifically related to the educational context can increase a school's capacity to focus on curricular and instructional strategies with the greatest potential to support student learning. This is exactly what we need to do as we're going into this new significant change for our school. We need to look at data that is directly relatable and relevant to our specific context. As shown by Clark et al., action-based research can do that. Action research can do that. 2 additional quotes for us. Number 1, participant debriefing aided in the interpretation of data and the coding process. This is from Jacobs. And in classroom action research, the emphasis is on the interpretations teachers and students make in their situations and environments. So as I previously stated, evidence-based outcome. We don't want to move forward with standards-based grading just because it worked at elementary school or just because we want to have a certain type of system because we think that it will work better. We want to have evidence, which would include the debriefing of the students and the teachers and their interpretations of what happened. And this will actually, I believe, aid even in the previous concern, which was teacher buy-in and some of the obstacles that I will mention later. So number 3 is improved school culture. Currently, teachers work independently within their own subject areas. Our school is small and generally only has 1 or 2 teachers per subject area. We also have only 1 class per grade level. For this reason, teachers generally work independently and have a great deal of autonomy. While this has benefits and we want teachers to continue having autonomy in their classroom, action research is designed to look at school-wide problems across all grade levels and subjects, and so it would be a good opportunity to work together and develop a collaborative community. So in Caragiorgi et al.'s research, they note that although staff members participating in the action research teams reported frustration and appeared demoralized at some points in the process, they actually reported satisfaction and appreciation overall. A specific quote is, school staff collaborated, developed, and enacted shared meanings, not only about the positive aspects, but also about the difficulties encountered in action. So by participating in the action research, the teachers may be working in their own classroom in their own subject areas, but it would give them a shared goal to focus on in solving a school-wide problem. And one more quote from Jacobs with PAR, that is participatory action research. A degree of participation is typically achieved by every participant, although the level of participation may vary among participants. So obviously, with our goal being that everyone would participate, action research does appear to provide that. So now we've covered the 3 advantages. Let's move to the barriers. Number 1, added tasks and time constraints. Due to the type of curriculum that we use, our teachers spend a lot of time developing their lessons. Some would argue that we don't really have a curriculum, we just have a list of standards from the overarching organization. We use the state of Virginia, even though we're in Cambodia. And so we just have the list of standards, and then teachers have to pull together and plan their lessons in a very detailed way, even oftentimes creating worksheets and other things. So that takes a lot of time. Many of our teachers also have outside ministries and volunteer work in addition to their role at our school. Oftentimes families come and they're doing mission work, but they also have someone teaching at the school in order to get a reduced or even free tuition for their children to attend the international school, which means that they have a lot of duties outside of just teaching at our school. So that is a difficulty. According to Caragiorgi et al., similar concerns have been expressed in previous research. For example, one group of action research team members in their report stated that issues raised by staff members almost brought our project to a halt, and the first stated concern for the majority of the teachers was time constraints. Obviously, this is a significant problem, and it's experienced by many other programs, many other schools when trying to do action research, so it would be something that we would want to keep in mind. The second barrier could be cultural norms and tradition. Our students and parents are strongly focused on grades and GPA. For another note is that for generations, the norm has been banking of education, in which the teacher instructs and narrates this, and the student listens, memorizes, and regurgitates the information for upcoming tests or examinations. Parents were educated in this way and argue that it works. Most of us are familiar with it because it's been going for generations, as the quote says. The students receive all of the information, and then they pass the test, they complete the assignments, and they get the grade. The argument is that this works. Students and parents are focused on the outcome of GPA and class rank in relation to getting into their desired college. This doesn't align with our goal to create lifelong learners, so it will be a significant obstacle to overcome. Also, many teachers want to continue doing what they've always done. They are content with the status quo. In a recent professional development session, science teacher Grace Mataika said, "Good teaching is good teaching," as a defense for continuing on with the status quo. She was basically arguing that we don't need to pay attention to current trends or new ideas and those sorts of things, because good teaching has always been good teaching, which you have lots of discussion that you could have around that, but it does demonstrate an attitude that would not necessarily want to jump into the change to standards-based grading. Hopefully, action research participation will help us overcome this attitude or correct certain beliefs. As noted in the advantages, this is a reasonable expectation with action research, meaning it is reasonable to expect that action research can help teachers overcome their negative attitudes or beliefs. And so we have one final barrier, negative presuppositions. These will have to be overcome. Prior thoughts about standards-based grading based on a lack of training or experience will be an obstacle to overcome. Some examples include standards-based grading is too subjective. Generally, people do not keep in mind and respect the education and professionalism of teachers, and they view a subjective nature of grading as a negative thing, because somehow teachers are not professionals who can make decisions and observations and come to a conclusion about a student's learning. So it's perceived as a negative. Also, there's the argument that standards-based grading is too focused on assessment results. In standards-based grading, students show mastery over certain skills. And people will argue that that is just based on did they pass the test, because there is no score recorded, for example, for daily assignments or practice. In fact, in standards-based grading, you're generally encouraged to not include anything that has to do with just practice. The only thing that would affect a student's mastery or proficiency of a standard would be whether they could do it when it came time for the assessment. There is misunderstanding around that, but it is a perceived negative of standards-based grading. And then another one would be misunderstanding or differences on the meaning of grades. Many people argue that the grade is reflecting how the student does as far as being a student. Do they come to class on time? Do they complete all the assignments? Do they turn things in on time? Did they do neat work and put their name on the assignment? And none of those things actually should be reflected in the meaning of grades, because grades, according to those who are proponents of standards-based grading, should represent whether the student understands the tasks, the objectives that are stated for the particular class that the student is in. So these are some specific issues that we will have to overcome because people have these presuppositions based on limited understanding of what standards-based grading is. These are my references for the assignment, and I thank you for listening and appreciate your feedback to come.